Well, it's about time for another lecture. Today's topic will be public opinion. Today's lecture is going to address how public opinion impacts the media as well as elections. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to leave this particular topic with an understanding of the 7 different effects or terms and then that address public opinion and the media, and then to evaluate which you think has the biggest impact. Well, if the subject of this lecture is public opinion, we should probably define it. Here's a one-sentence definition from any textbook, probably, of public opinion. Essentially, it's the politically relevant opinions held by average people that they're willing to share or they're willing to express openly. That's a textbook definition of public opinion. So let's begin by exploring public opinion, its impact in elections, and the way in which public opinion is impacted by the media. Public opinion impacts the media with something called the horse race effect. This is where the media tends to focus on a candidate who is ahead or behind in the polls, as opposed to focusing on the candidate's stances on the issues. So just like if you were to go to a horse race, and you would hear, and they're off, and the announcer would focus on who's ahead or who's behind. The media tends to focus on who's ahead or who's behind in the polls, as opposed to candidates' stances on the issues. I'd like to pause for a moment and offer a bit of my bias, which I think others would support. For our democracy to work, people need to vote for candidates based upon their opinion of the candidates, not where they stand in the polls. Maybe a better way to compare candidates is to look at their background in politics. What is their plan for the economy? What kind of proposals do they support to try to improve education or protect the environment? Maybe there's some unique foreign policy experience that a candidate has. Those factors should be taken into consideration as opposed to who's ahead or who's behind in some sort of a poll. But that's my bias. The media is also impacted by something called infotainment. What we've seen in the last 20 years is that the news industry has really made a lot of money. And so a lot of news stories are focused on entertaining viewers with the goal of trying to increase their ratings as opposed to informing viewers as to the background of different candidates. Hey, the graphics look great. Things are interesting and fun and maybe even funny, but style and information wins out over substantive investigative reporting. Often these days, what we see is people go to news shows to be entertained, not necessarily to be informed. So this is an action undertaken by actual viewers. If you're conservative, you tend to be drawn to a station like Fox News because you agree with many of the interpretations, and you end up, wanting to be reinforced by something that you enjoy watching. The same would be true for liberals who might be drawn to a station like MSNBC. And here you see some other examples as well. News is entertaining people, not informing people, in part because consumers want it that way. Again, I just want to reinforce one of my biases here. Really, society and democracy loses by this approach if the news organizations are entertaining us rather than informing us. We need those news stories to inform so that we can have a successful representative democracy. Okay, so we've explored some ways in which the media is impacted by public opinion. Let's explore voter behavior. Voters are often impacted by public opinion with something called the bandwagon effect. This is when voters support a candidate who's ahead in the polls, and they support that person because they're ahead, as opposed to supporting that candidate because of the candidate's stances on the issues. They jump on that candidate's bandwagon. While some voters are impacted by the bandwagon effect, others are impacted by something called the underdog effect. This is when voters support someone who is behind in the polls, rather than voting for someone because of the candidate's stances on the issues. I always like to include a visual aid. Well, for the underdog effect, here we see an image of underdog. Still, other voters are impacted by something called the throwaway effect. Let me try to explain. Voters fear they'll be throwing away their vote if they vote for someone who's way behind in the polls, even if they support that candidate's stances on the issues. Sometimes the throwaway effect encourages people just to stay home and they don't vote because they figure, well, my candidate has no chance of winning. Others might vote for one of the front runners because they figure, well, okay, my guy doesn't have a chance of winning, so I'm going to try to influence the election this way. And then we have swing voters. As the name might suggest, swing voters are voters who could maybe vote for any candidate in an election, and in most cases it would be either a Democrat or a Republican. Often these are the so-called difference makers when it comes to winning and losing elections. Ironically, a typical profile of a swing voter is a so-called soccer mom. Ever since the 1990s, the so-called soccer mom vote has been an important profile that has been coveted by both the Democratic and Republican parties because they're often the difference makers in elections. Some of these tendencies is the so-called soccer mom vote. Well, these tend to be white women who live in the suburbs and they come from middle-class families. And they've also had at least some college, and they're engaged in raising families. Some have careers, some stay home and are homemakers. Swing voters are important in any election because you could kind of predict voter behavior in many cases. Often, we know that about 35% of the voters will vote for a Democratic candidate. And about 35% of the voters, again, no matter what, will vote for a Republican candidate. It's the 30% or so in the middle who determine the difference between winning and losing in an election. The chart on the left helps to identify a voter profile of most Americans. Look and see how many are so-called moderates. Those moderates, those people in the middle, often are the difference makers. A while back, Saturday Night Live took a humorous approach to the so-called undecided voters. I will have a link to this on our Canvas site. You can watch that after the lecture if you like. The last topic I'd like to explore when it comes to the role in elections would be the impact of public opinion and exit polls. Exit polls are polls that are conducted the day of an election as people leave election sites and they're asked, hey, who did you vote for and what were some of the key reasons why you voted for this candidate or this particular topic? It's a way to try to predict the outcome of an election before the results are official. And it also was kind of like, do I dare say, an autopsy, helping to explain why people voted for certain candidates. I'd like to study some of the 2016 exit poll results from the last presidential election. And we'll start with issues of race. Here are some of the results. Let's see if we can make some sense of this data. On the right, in the white circle, you see that 70% of the people who voted in 2016 were white. Among white voters, 58% voted for President Trump. In the blue area, you see that many racial and ethnic minorities, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, voted very strongly for Hillary Clinton. The previous slide showed how race impacted voter behavior. This one shows sex. 53% of the men who voted for Donald Trump. 54% of the women who voted for Hillary Clinton. So this slide shows how race and sex combined influenced voter behavior. Notice the red here. White women were more likely to vote for President Trump, 53%, voted for President Trump, as opposed to 43% who voted for Hillary Clinton. This was a big surprise to political scientists and analysts because, about 2 weeks before the election, there was a tape of Donald Trump boasting about sexually assaulting women, and the thought was that many of these women would not vote for candidate Trump at that time as a result. Um, in the blue, you see how many black men, black women, Latino men and women tended to vote for Hillary Clinton. But, those swing voters, those white women from many middle class families living in the suburbs, they tended to lean toward candidate Trump. And that really put him over the finish line, so to speak, in 2016. I thought I would also show this one. Voters were asked, are you a member of a union? And typically, unions have been a stronghold of the Democratic Party. And 51% of union members did vote for Hillary Clinton. But when Barack Obama ran for president, he received much more support from union members. Hillary Clinton did not. Many union members shifted from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party in the 2016 election with candidate Trump. The last one I'd like to show deals with population. Here you see that if people lived in cities of 50,000 or more, they tended to vote for Hillary Clinton, 59% did. Well, if people lived in rural areas or small cities, the tendency was that they would vote for candidate Trump, 62% there. And you can see that candidate Trump had a lead over Hillary Clinton in the suburbs as well. Well, how accurate are these public opinion polls? Let's explore it. If public opinion polls are conducted accurately, they can really give you a good prediction on who the winner might be. In 1992, Bill Clinton was predicted to be the winner. Well, with 44% of the popular vote. The outcome, well, was pretty close to that. In 2004, George W. Bush ran against John Kerry. And while the pollsters predicted that this would be really close, they put George W. Bush ahead of John Kerry. And the actual outcome was pretty close to their predictions. In 2008, then Senator Obama ran against Senator John McCain. These pollsters predicted that Obama would win. The actual outcome said that they were right. When the polls are done correctly and accurately, they can do a great job of predicting an election. Well, in 2016, they did not. Here's some examples of polls that were taken about 3 weeks before the 2016 election. On the left, we see that Real Clear Politics, which is an average of many different polls, predicted that Hillary Clinton would win really in a landslide with 340 electoral votes. 538, another really reputable website, predicted that Hillary Clinton had just about an 88% chance of defeating Donald Trump. Right before the election, this was actually the morning of the election, Real Clear Politics predicted that Hillary Clinton would win in a much closer election, and the same was true for 538. These are the actual results from the 2016 election. Notice the popular vote on the right. Okay. Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote, but she won several states by large margins, and Donald Trump won many other states by small margins. And so Donald Trump won the electoral vote, if you remember the lecture dealing with the Electoral College and how that works. But the bottom line is that those pollsters all made mistakes. So what went wrong in 2016? Well, there's a video clip that you may want to watch. It's not very long. I will put a hyperlink to this on our Canvas course. They don't have all of the answers yet. However, this asks some good questions, and the pollsters need to reevaluate how they go about finding people's views. Well, what can we conclude about public opinion? Well, over the course of this lecture, we've defined public opinion and offered some examples as to how the media, voter behavior, and exit polls impact our political process. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to define those 7 terms that are listed on the lecture outline and evaluate which you believe has the biggest impact on elections. Well, that's all for today. Hopefully you learned something new about public opinion.